The cold came first. Lena Carver felt it before she opened her eyes. A deep, pressing cold that had worked through the back of her torn jacket and settled into the earth underneath her. The kind of cold that belongs to open mountain ground in the hour before sunrise. She became aware of herself gradually, the weight of her body against the hard soil, the smell of damp pine needles directly beneath her cheek, the sound of wind working through the very tops of tall trees, high and far away and almost rhythmic, like something breathing. She opened her eyes. The sky above her was the gray of very early morning, that particular shade that is not committed to anything, not full dark and not dawn, sitting in the undecided middle hour when night has given up and the day has not yet started. Directly above her the stars were faint and retreating. Along the horizon to the east there was a narrow band of something lighter, just the suggestion that the sun was somewhere on its way. She had no memory of lying down. She sat up slowly, and that was when the second thing hit her. Her body felt wrong. Not wrong in the way that something painful is wrong, but wrong in the sense of being unfamiliar. Like wearing a piece of clothing that has always felt slightly too small, and then waking up one morning to find that it fits perfectly, and has always fit, and the tightness was the problem, not the clothing. Every muscle moved with a sureness she did not recognize from the inside. They were not sore from a night on cold ground, and not stiff from poor sleep. They were settled, certain, placed with a precision she had never felt before. She turned her hands over and looked at them in the gray light. Her palms were dirty. There was something dark beneath her fingernails that she looked at for one moment and then chose, deliberately and consciously, not to examine. Her field jacket was torn along the full length of both sleeves. Her jeans were caked in mud from the knees down. She got to her feet. She was upright before she had finished deciding to stand, and she stood there at full height for a moment, processing the fact of that, the ease of it, the absence of the small resistances that usually accompanied getting up from cold ground. She looked around to place herself in the landscape. Tall pines, the high elevation kind, straight-trunked, closely spaced, their lower sections bare and their upper canopy tightly woven into a dark ceiling above her. The slope rose steeply to her west, and against the still dark sky to the east, she could see the familiar ridgeline of the western sector of the Millbrook Conservation Reserve, which she had worked inside for 11 months, and knew the way she knew her own apartment. She was approximately 2 miles from the eastern trailhead where she had parked her truck the previous evening. She started walking. The first thing she noticed was that walking felt like nothing. Her feet placed themselves over roots and loose stones and uneven terrain without any deliberate guidance. They found the best ground automatically, the way feet move in a familiar space that the body has already mapped and no longer needs to think about. She was moving faster than her ordinary walking pace, and she was not breathing harder for it. The gray half-dark of the pre-dawn forest was enough to see by with a clarity she had never had in these light conditions before. Every rock and root in her path was clear, distinct, legible. The space between the trees read to her as varying gradients of gray rather than undifferentiated shadow. Her left knee did not hurt. She registered this consciously on the first real slope, when she would normally have felt the familiar pull and dull ache that had been her quiet companion since July, when a misstep on a rocky section of trail had sent her sitting down heavily on the ground with her eyes shut and her teeth set. She had been careful with the knee for 3 months, adjusting her movement patterns, avoiding certain angles of descent. She put her full weight on it now, deliberately, and shifted from side to side. Nothing. The knee held as solidly as if the injury had never happened, as if the July afternoon had belonged to someone else's body. She kept walking. She stopped when the sound hit her. A creek was running somewhere to her south. She knew that creek. It ran along the lower boundary of the reserve's southern sector, and she was standing at least 300 yards north of it, probably more. But she could hear it with the clarity of someone standing at its bank. She could distinguish the sound of the water moving over the larger exposed stones from the quieter sound of it over the sandy shallows. She tilted her head slightly and heard, further still and much further east, what she was almost certain was a vehicle on the main road beyond the reserve's eastern boundary. That road was more than 3 miles away. She stood still and let this land. She pressed her palm flat against the nearest pine trunk and held it there. She could feel the individual texture of the bark with unusual precision. Each ridge, each gap, the faint dampness of the living wood beneath the outer layer. The air was well below 40 degrees. She had been lying on open ground in a torn jacket since some point the previous evening, She was not shivering. She was not cold. She could not explain any of these things, and she was not going to try to explain them before she got to her truck. She walked. Her name was Lena Carver. She was 24 years old, and she had come to Millbrook, Montana, 11 months ago, to take a field research position with the Wildlife Conservation Institute, which meant her days were spent alone in the forest, with cameras and notebooks, and the specific satisfaction of work that asked for precision and gave back silence. She had a biology degree from a university in Oregon and 4 years of field work across 2 prior states, and she had come specifically to Millbrook because she needed, after the end of a long relationship in Wyoming, to be somewhere that asked very little of her socially and a great deal of her professionally. She had liked it here. She had found the isolation restorative rather than lonely. She had been doing well. 4 days ago, a wolf had bitten her. She had been in the mid-sector of the reserve in the late afternoon, crouching beside a camera mount bolted to the base of a pine tree, scrolling through the previous 48 hours of footage on a small field screen. When she looked up, the wolf was already close, impossibly close for a wild animal approaching a human, because she had not heard it, and she had good ears, and the ground conditions had been damp and quiet, and she should have heard it long before it was at this distance. It was the largest gray wolf she had ever seen in 4 years of field observation. She had measured wolf tracks and read pack studies, and observed live animals in 3 different states, and this animal exceeded the upper end of the size range she knew for the species in this region, by a significant margin. Its fur was dark along the spine and shoulders, nearly black in those places, lightening at the chest. Its eyes were a vivid, clear amber that caught the thin afternoon light and seemed almost to illuminate from within, as though the color were being generated rather than reflected. She had done what she was trained to do. She backed away slowly, maintaining soft visual contact without direct staring, keeping her movements smooth and her pace steady, opening a clear path for the animal to exit in the direction away from her. She moved 3 steps. The wolf moved before she completed the 4th. It crossed the remaining distance in a motion her eyes could not track properly, a transition from absolute stillness to full speed that registered in her perception as the wolf being far away, and then the wolf being on her, without the middle. It bit down on her left shoulder, not a kill bite and not a defensive bite, something precise, controlled, applied with deliberate force to a specific location. It held for 1 full second. It released. The wolf turned and was gone into the trees before she had finished drawing the breath she might have used for a scream. She had driven herself to the pharmacy. She had not gone to the clinic. She had cleaned and treated the wound herself, logged it in her private field notebook as animal encounter, minor injury, and gone to bed early. She had said nothing to anyone. The bite was mostly healed by the following morning. By the morning after that, it was a pale, smooth scar that looked 3 years old rather than 2 days. She touched that scar through the torn shoulder of her jacket as the trailhead came into view through the trees, her truck sitting dark and frost-covered in the growing early light, exactly where she had left it. She climbed in and started the engine and sat with both hands on the steering wheel while the cab slowly warmed. She tightened her grip on the wheel in the absent, settling way a person does when preparing to drive, and the hard plastic of the steering column creaked under the pressure of her fingers. She looked down at her hands on the wheel. She loosened her grip very carefully. At the institute, she went to the bathroom and cleaned up as well as she could at the sink, changed into the spare clothes in her locker, and sat at her desk for 4 minutes. On the corner of the desk sat a steel travel mug someone on the early shift had left behind. She reached out and picked it up to move it off her workspace, and when she glanced down at her hand, there was a long, deep dent running along one side of the mug in the exact shape of her 4 fingers. She had compressed the steel with the casual, unthinking pressure of picking something up. She wrapped the mug in a paper bag and put it in the trash under the desk. She wrote 4 brief sentences to her supervisor and left them on his keyboard. She was in her truck and out of the parking lot within 12 minutes of arriving. She drove north. Her grandmother had left her a cabin 2 years ago, a simple, solid place at the end of a long dirt road in the mountains north of Millbrook, surrounded by dense forest. No neighbors within 4 miles. No cell signal once the road left the highway. She had stayed there twice since inheriting it, both times when she needed the particular medicine of complete silence. She needed it more right now than she ever had. She stopped for gas and groceries on the way. The grocery store was the harder stop. She pushed through the automatic doors, and the smell of the interior hit her before her eyes had adjusted. The produce section, and the refrigerated cases, and the cleaning products on the floors, and the deli counter in the back, and the dozens of individual human scents of every other shopper and every staff member, all arriving simultaneously, each one distinct and identifiable, and each one far too vivid. She stood just inside the entrance with her eyes closed and breathed through her mouth in the slow, controlled way she was already developing for managing input that was too large, and after a minute, the intensity settled enough to work with. She moved through the aisles quickly, took only what she needed, used the self-checkout, and was back in the truck in under 10 minutes. The rest of the drive she completed without stopping. The cabin was cold in the thorough way that empty buildings in mountain climates become cold in October. She built a fire in the wood stove before anything else, then put the groceries away, then ate a significant and somewhat alarming amount of food because her body was demanding it in the insistent, baseline way that had nothing to do with pleasure. Then she sat at the kitchen table with her notebook. She wrote in the column format she used for field data: observation, first occurrence, duration, and current status. She wrote down every change she had noticed since the morning 4 days ago, when she had woken with a scar where a wound had been. The strength, the speed, the healed knee, the temperature tolerance, the senses, hearing, smell, vision in low light, the appetite, the sleep, the way the steel mug had yielded under her hand. She read what she had written and then wrote at the bottom: the bite changed something, and beneath that, something significant. The next 2 days she spent in careful self-study. She tested her strength against objects around the cabin: the iron stove grate, the heavy log splitting round she used in the woodyard, the oak chest in the back bedroom that she moved from wall to wall with one hand without straining. She ran in the forest each afternoon, not trying for speed, and clocked times that were not within the range of any ordinary person of her fitness level. She sat on the porch in the evenings and practiced distinguishing the individual sounds that reached her from the surrounding forest. She wrote everything down with the same discipline she brought to fieldwork, because the data was what the data was. On the third evening the sky was clear, and the cold was the particular sharp, dry cold of a night that will be very cold indeed, and the moon was already visible in the eastern sky, before the sun finished going down over the western ridge. It rose full and brilliantly white, the kind of full moon that seems slightly too large for the sky it occupies, and the moment it cleared the ridge and its light fell unobstructed across the clearing behind the cabin, something happened inside her chest that was unlike anything she had a prior name for. It was not an emotion. It was a physical event, a pull from her center outward, a warmth that spread to the ends of her fingers and the soles of her feet, a pressure in her blood that was entirely new and at the same time felt like something she had been moving toward without knowing it. She set down her tea on the porch railing without looking at it. She walked off the porch and into the clearing. The moonlight fell across the grass in broad, sharp-edged patches. The air was cold and still, and the smell of it was enormous, in a way she was still learning to process: pine resin and cold soil, and the creek below the slope, and everything that had moved through this area in the past full day. She stood in the center of the moonlight, and the change began. It happened in seconds. It was not pain. It was expansion. The sense of becoming something larger than she had been a moment before, of having more dimensions available to her than she had previously been using. Her senses did not heighten, they transformed, became different instruments reading different information. The clearing was lit as clearly as a bright afternoon. The wind was a language she could nearly read, the ground was information. She was on 4 feet in the grass, and she was a wolf, and the wolf was not afraid. She ran. She ran north through the pines and over the ridge, and down into the valley below, along the creek bank and across it at the shallow section, and up through the meadow on the far side, and east along the ridge line, and back through the forest from the east, in a long sweeping circuit, and the night was not dark to her, and the cold was not cold. She ran for hours. It was the most honest thing she had ever done with her body, the most completely herself she had ever been. All the fear and confusion and careful management of the past 4 days were real things, but they were small things, set in their proper corner of her awareness, and what was large and true was the forest, and the moonlight, and the certainty of her own body moving through the world. When the sky began to lighten along the eastern ridge, she was back in the clearing. She lay in the wet grass, and the change reversed itself as the dawn strengthened, and when it was done, she lay on her back and looked at the pale sky and breathed. She let everything settle. She let what had happened become a fact she was living with rather than a situation she was managing. After a while, she pressed her palms flat against the wet ground to push herself upright. A man was standing at the edge of the clearing. He was inside the tree line on the north side, standing still in the shadow of the pines, with both hands resting in the pockets of a dark jacket. Tall, 6'2" or more, dark-haired, with a quality of stillness that was not passivity, but the deliberate, complete absence of wasted movement. He appeared to be in his early 30s. His eyes were visible even at this distance. Dark gray, steady, fixed on her with an expression that held no alarm, no surprise, no fear, and no apology. He had clearly been standing there for some time. The way he was positioned had the quality of a person who had been waiting and had settled into the waiting, not someone who had just arrived. Her senses gathered him in without being asked. His scent reached her on the still morning air, and it was unlike anything she had encountered on another person before. Something that sat below the surface layer of clothing and cold air. Something old and deep, like stone and high-altitude forest and rain that had been falling for a very long time. Something that her wolf awareness recognized before her conscious mind had formed a single question about it. "You shifted back clean," he said. His voice was even and unhurried, chosen with care. That almost never happens on a first full moon. Most newly turned wolves spend half the following day still trying to find their way back to themselves. Lena stayed where she was on the ground. She looked at him steadily. "Who are you?" He did not move toward her. "Kalian Voss," he said. "I have been waiting for you to shift back so that we could talk." The birds were beginning in the tree line behind her. The light was strengthening. Lena Carver sat in the cold, wet grass in her torn clothes and looked at this man who had been watching her through the night, and she felt, beneath the reasonable fear and the reasonable suspicion and the 100 reasonable questions, a pull toward him that was not like any pull she had felt toward another person before. She did not have a name for it yet. She only knew that it pointed at him with the quiet, unargued certainty of a compass needle finding north. She did not trust it. She was far too careful a thinker to trust a feeling she could not explain. But she felt it. She sat up straight. She squared her shoulders. She met his gray eyes without flinching, and she said, "Then start talking. Leave nothing out." He did not come into the clearing right away, which was the first reasonable thing he had done, and she noted it. He waited while she got herself together. He waited while she stood and brushed the wet grass from her clothes, while she went to the porch and took the blanket from the bench and wrapped it around her shoulders, because she was not cold but she was damp and she was tired, and the blanket felt like a reasonable thing to have. He waited while she went inside and put the kettle on the wood stove, and when she came back to the porch with 2 mugs and sat in the chair that faced the clearing and set the second mug on the railing beside the empty chair, he crossed the grass and stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked at the second mug. He looked at her. She said, "You can sit," and he sat in the other chair with the ease of someone who had long since learned to be comfortable in difficult situations without needing to perform comfort. They sat for a moment, in the morning quiet. The birds were louder now, spreading across the tree line in the way they did at full dawn, building sound from nothing into a layered landscape of it. The sky above the eastern ridge was pink at the bottom and pale above. She wrapped both hands around the warm mug and looked at him. "How much do you already understand?" he asked. "Very little that is actually useful," she said. "I have a list of observations, and no framework for any of them. Start from the beginning. Do not simplify." He did. He spoke without drama, without hedging, in the measured and deliberate voice she would come to know well in the weeks ahead. He told her about shifters, people who carried the ability to transform into wolf form, born to it through bloodline inheritance, or, in rarer cases, turned to it through the bite of another shifted wolf. He told her that they had existed alongside human society for as long as any record existed, living in organized communities called packs, with established territories, internal governance, laws, hierarchies. He described the structure in some detail, the alpha who led each pack, the regional groupings of packs, the broader continental structures above those. He told her about the fundamental mechanisms of pack life, the instincts and drives and social physics of a community of wolves living in human form in the human world. moving between the two states of themselves with the practiced ease of people who had been doing it since childhood. He told her about rogues. Wolves living outside all pack structures, he explained, usually because they had been expelled, for behavior that endangered the community, for violence that violated the laws, for the specific kind of instability that packs could not house without risk to everyone in them. Rogues were usually unstable. They were always alone, and the aloneness made the instability worse over time. They were the primary ongoing enforcement problem within the shifter world, the reason that the laws needed active maintaining and not just declaring. The single most fundamental law, the one with no exceptions and no appeals process, was that a rogue was forbidden from biting a human. Because a rogue bite passed the shift, the change entered the person who received it and began doing exactly what it had done to Lena over the past 4 days. It changed me, she said. Yes. And the wolf that bit me did it intentionally. He was quiet for a moment, not an empty quiet, but a considered one. That is one of the things I am here to determine, he said. She filed this in the part of her mind she used for things she intended to return to. How long have you been in this forest? She asked. 3 days. She looked at him. You tracked the rogue here and waited 3 days before approaching me. I arrived the morning after the bite, he said. I needed to observe before I made contact with you. Specifically, I needed to know whether you would complete a full transformation or whether the change would fade. In some people who receive a rogue bite, the shift does not complete. The senses alter for a few weeks and then return to what they were before. In others, it completes fully. The right response to each situation is different, and the wrong approach in either case can cause real harm. I needed to know what you were becoming before I spoke to you. And now you know. Now I know. You are a full shift. He paused. And you returned to yourself before dawn, on your first full moon. That is very unusual. Most newly turned wolves cannot complete the reversal for hours, sometimes through a full day. The speed with which you came back tells me something about the nature of what you carry. She looked at him steadily. What does that mean in practical terms? It means several things, he said, that will make more sense as you become more familiar with what you are. What matters most immediately is that you learn the foundational controls, how to keep the shift from happening involuntarily when you are around other people, how to manage your senses in populated environments so that you do not become overwhelmed and do not react in ways that cause exposure, how to move through your ordinary life without drawing attention. You cannot return to your work until you have those things in place. You cannot go back to populated areas safely without them. And you are here to teach me that. Yes. She studied him over the rim of her mug. He had the quality of someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was a form of competence. He was not fidgeting, not filling silence with unnecessary words, not watching her the way most people watch a person they are not sure of, with the small constant recalibrations of someone managing uncertainty. He was simply there, patient in the way that things are patient when they know what they are and where they stand. Why you specifically? She asked. Is this what you do? Find the people that rogues bite? I have extensive experience with this kind of situation, he said. That is a description of a qualification. I asked why it was you. He turned and met her eyes directly, and the gaze was steady enough that she had to credit him for it. It is part of an answer, he said. The rest is for a different conversation. She decided not to push it. She was practical enough to know that she could not force information from someone who had decided to hold it, and she had more immediate problems than his biography. She needed to be able to function. She needed to understand what she was well enough to get back to her life, without destroying anything else. There is a shed behind the cabin, she said. It is dry. There is a cot. There is a lantern. In exchange for staying in it, you answer my questions when I ask them. To the best of my ability, he said, which she heard clearly, as not the same thing as yes, and which she respected, for being honest about the distinction. He moved into the shed that morning without making it a production. He had a single dark backpack with him, organized with the efficiency of someone who had been living out of it for years, and within an hour the shed was workable. She spent the rest of that first day asking him questions and listening to his answers. She learned the mechanics of the shift in considerable detail, how the full moon compelled it powerfully in the first months, but how intention and practice would eventually make it voluntary, entirely within her control, available when she chose it, and absent when she did not. She learned how strong emotion could trigger an involuntary shift in a newly turned wolf, and how the response to that was the same as the response to every other part of it. Not suppression, not surrender, but the development of a working relationship with the wolf that was neither combat nor capitulation. She learned about what he called ground control, the basic practice of feeling the wolf's awareness running alongside her own, without either merging with it or fighting it. She would need to practice this in the coming days. It would feel impossible at first, and then merely difficult, and then eventually simply ordinary, the way any skill feels after it has been thoroughly practiced. She learned about the broader world in more detail, pack territories and their boundaries, the ways disputes were handled, the mechanics of how thousands of people lived their double existences inside ordinary human society without exposure. She asked about all of it, and he answered all of it, clearly, and without condescension. What she noticed, by the end of the day, was the architecture of his answers. Every question she turned toward him personally, where he had come from, which pack he belonged to, who had sent him, or whether he had come on his own authority, received an answer that was technically true and practically opaque. He had been doing work like this for many years. He had considerable experience with rogue situations. He had encountered newly turned wolves before and knew what they needed. Each sentence verifiable, each sentence a brick in a careful wall built to give her information while keeping a much larger view blocked. She noted this with the precision she brought to field observation. She let it go for the day. The following afternoon, she was in the clearing behind the cabin, working on ground control. The concept was simple, and the practice was not. The wolf was present in her as a second awareness at all times now, interested, alert, running alongside her human perception with the easy companionship of something that had been there her whole life and had only recently been acknowledged. Learning to coexist with it, rather than either surrendering to it or fighting it, required a quality of sustained inner stillness that was new to her and that she was only beginning to understand how to find. She was standing with her eyes closed, her breathing slow and deliberate, letting the forest register through her senses in the way the wolf wanted, without letting it tip into the wolf's full dominant mode, when Kalian said very quietly from behind her, "Do not move." She went still. Her senses gave her the information, before her ears found the sound. Another wolf, moving from the north, through the trees. Not Kalian, not herself. Moving slowly, with the particular alert deliberateness of an animal that has no specific target but is fully engaged. And beneath the scent of it, running through the other information like a thread, something she was already learning to identify, the particular quality of a rogue, the absence of the settled, organized quality that pack wolves carried. Something loose, something structureless, something that had been alone too long. The wolf came out of the tree line, 20 yards to her north. It was large and gray-brown, and it stopped at the edge of the trees and looked at them with dull amber eyes that moved between her and Kalian without settling on either. Kalian stepped forward. He did not shift. He made no sound. He simply placed himself between her and the rogue and faced the animal, and the quality of what happened next was something she felt in the air of the clearing before she could describe it. The absolute stillness of him, not the stillness of someone being careful or cautious, but the stillness of something at the top of an order it does not need to announce. A weight in the atmosphere that had no physical source. The rogue dropped, from standing to flat on the forest floor in a single motion, its head pressed down, its ears back, its entire body compacted and flattened as close to the earth as it could make itself. Complete, involuntary submission. The posture of something that had just encountered something it recognized as categorically, entirely above itself. Kalian said 2 words, in a language she did not recognize. Low, measured, final. The rogue turned and was gone into the trees in under 3 seconds. Kalian turned back to her. She looked at him for a long moment without speaking. That was not a normal display of authority, she said. Rogues recognize authority when they encounter it, he said. That much authority. Over a territorial animal. Without a physical threat of any kind. He held her gaze for 1 beat longer than neutral. Authority comes in different degrees, he said. Come. You broke your focus when you heard me speak. Let's continue. She followed him back to the center of the clearing. She resumed her stance and closed her eyes. But the word sat in her mind, authority, alongside the memory of the rogue dropping, alongside the observation about Dale that she had filed 2 days later and not yet spoken aloud. She was patient. She was building the picture carefully, piece by piece, and she would have it complete eventually. She always did. The visit to Dale's property on the 5th day told her more than any single conversation had managed. Kalian mentioned it the previous evening on the porch, while they were eating dinner together. This had begun happening by accident. She had come back from an afternoon run on the 2nd day to find him cooking on the wood stove, with the quiet efficiency of someone who had cooked in worse conditions in worse places, and she had sat down, and they had eaten together, without either of them deciding to, and it had simply continued from there, as something that happened in the evenings. He mentioned the visit matter-of-factly. There were wolves in the area, people who had lived what she was now living for years, and meeting them would give her something he could not give her, which was the texture of actual experience rather than explained principle. She said tomorrow. He nodded. They walked 40 minutes through the forest the following morning. She noticed he moved through terrain the way she was coming to move, with the ease of something that belonged in this environment. Precise footfall, no wasted effort. The property came into view through the pines gradually. A cleared area, a low timber cabin, 2 outbuildings, a section of fenced pasture to the east. 3 people were waiting in the yard. Dale was the older one, late 50s, broad across the shoulders, with a close gray beard, and the particular quality of attention in his eyes that belongs to people who assess things carefully and do not revise their assessments without good reason. He shook Lena's hand with a firm grip and said he was glad to meet her, and she believed him, which she did not always believe when people said it. Finn was perhaps 25, sandy-haired, in constant motion, his weight shifting, his hands finding and losing pockets, his eyes moving between faces with the speed of someone whose internal processing runs faster than the external world can supply input for. He was easy to like and was aware of it, which in someone else might have been irritating, but in Finn read simply as an honest acknowledgement of a fact. She liked him immediately, and then, 2 minutes later, noticed how sharply he was watching everything, while appearing to watch nothing in particular, and revised her read of him upward significantly. Nora was the one Lena found herself most naturally drawn to, 22 or 23, with dark hair cut short and an open face with nothing guarded in it. The kind of openness that was not naivety, but a decision, a choice to be direct and warm rather than protective. The first thing she said to Lena after hello was, "I heard you shifted back clean on your first full moon. Is that actually true?" "Apparently so," Lena said. Nora looked at her with the frank, uncalculated interest of someone who was genuinely curious, rather than performing curiosity. "You should understand what that means," she said. "That is not a small thing." They sat in the yard through the morning in the thin October sun. Lena asked questions and listened carefully. Dale and Finn had been on this land for 11 years, a small, quiet pack with an established territory and very few complications, the way things were when the setup was right and the people in it were suited to each other. Nora had come from a pack in the northeast that had dissolved 2 years ago, had traveled west, had found this place and these people, and had stayed. They answered Lena's questions with the texture that Kalian's instructional precision could not provide, what it actually felt like to navigate the human world while being what they were, the specific practical friction points, the unexpected freedoms of it, the community of it, the ways the 2 parts of themselves were in tension, and the ways they were not. What Lena spent the most time observing, with the part of her attention she kept running in the background while the rest of her engaged with the conversation, was how all 3 of them interacted with Kalian. Dale addressed him with a deference that stopped just short of formal but was unmistakably present, the deference of a man who led his own group and led it well, and was nonetheless aware, in a deep and settled way, that he was in the presence of a different and greater order of authority. He did not perform this. He simply could not help it. The way you cannot help being aware of the temperature of a room, even when no one is talking about it. Finn's restless energy, which was constant and easy and directed freely at everyone else, became measured and considered when he spoke directly to Kalian, as if he understood that this was a conversation in which he should bring his best attention rather than his ordinary attention. Nora was the most natural with him, but even Nora had a specificity of language when she addressed him, choosing her words with care, a deliberateness that was different from the easy directness she used with Lena. Not fear, not anxiety, Something closer to a kind of respect that runs deep enough that it shapes how you communicate, without requiring you to think about it. None of them introduced him by any title. None of them said what he was. Kalian offered nothing, moved through the morning with the same settled quality he always had, and allowed whatever he was to remain inferred by the people who already knew it. She said nothing at the property. On the walk back through the forest, she was quiet until the cabin came into view through the trees, and then she said, "Dale defers to you." Kalian kept walking. "He is a pack leader," she said. "He has led his group for 11 years, and done it well, and he is not a man who defers easily. But he defers to you. Finn tracks you the way you track something that matters. Even Nora, who is the most comfortable with you of the three, speaks to you differently than she speaks to me." He stopped when they reached the edge of the clearing. He turned to face her. "I told you the rest was for a different conversation," he said. "I know," she said. "I am not asking for that conversation today. I am telling you that I am paying close attention, so that when the conversation happens, you understand that I already know the approximate shape of what is behind it, and I am not going to be surprised. I am simply going to be glad to finally have the actual information." He looked at her for a moment. Something in his expression that had not been there before. Something that was very nearly appreciation, or something adjacent to it. "Fair enough," he said, and went into the shed. That evening, they sat on the porch after dinner as they had been doing. She asked him where he had grown up, and he told her, the mountain northwest, specific and brief. She told him about moving with her parents between 3 states through her childhood, about the biology teacher in 10th grade, who had changed the direction of her life entirely, by taking the class to a wolf sanctuary, and letting Lena hold the tracking equipment, while the researcher demonstrated it, and about the feeling she had had in that moment, not of wanting to do science, but of recognizing that this was the shape her life was supposed to take. He listened the way she had come to expect from him, fully, without the background hum of formulating his response while she was still speaking. He was simply present, receiving what she said. She told him about Clara, her older sister, who was an architect in Portland, and who was organized and grounded in all the ways Lena was not, and who kept the family somewhat together through the sheer force of her practical competence, and who was going to start asking pointed questions about the silence, if it went on much longer. He said, "Is she someone you trust?" She thought about this. "Completely," she said. "She is the person I would tell everything to, eventually, once I understand it well enough myself." He nodded, and she had the impression he was filing this away with the same care she used to file things away. She asked if he had family. He looked at the tree line for a moment before answering. "A younger brother," he said. "When we were teenagers. My mother when I was 22. My father 3 years ago." "I am sorry," she said, and meant it. He turned back to her, and there was something in his face she had not seen before. Not grief exactly, but the quality of a person who has carried something heavy for long enough that the weight has become ordinary, part of the furniture of their interior life, that they have stopped noticing, until something brings them back to it. "It was a long time ago," he said, "most of it." She said, "What was your brother like?" He was quiet for one moment, a genuine pause, not a managed one, and then something shifted in his expression, small and private, like a door, opening briefly onto a room that was usually kept closed. "The loudest person I have ever known," he said. "In any room, in any situation, you always knew exactly where he was." She smiled, before she decided to. "That is Clara," almost word for word. They sat in the quiet that came after that, and it was not an empty quiet but a shared one, the particular quality of ease between two people who have discovered, without quite intending to, that they are genuinely comfortable in each other's company. The forest was dark and the stars were clear, and the cold was the pleasant kind that belongs to mountain nights when the sky is completely open. Lena sat in her chair and felt the ease of it, and thought about what to do with the ease of it, and decided to do nothing with it tonight. She would think about it later. She suspected later was going to be complicated. She thought about what she was building. She had come to Millbrook to be alone, and had spent 11 months doing exactly that. Building a life that asked as little of her socially as possible, that kept her in the forest and out of rooms full of people, that made isolation feel like a choice rather than a default. And then she had driven north to a cabin in the mountains, and found a man standing at the edge of a clearing, And now she was sitting on a porch in the dark with him, and talking about the things that actually mattered to her. And the alarming part was not that it was happening. The alarming part was how naturally it was happening, how little resistance she felt toward it. She was practical enough to know that the mate bond was part of this. The bond was real, and it was doing what it did, pulling her toward him, making his presence feel necessary in a way that had no explanation she could give anyone. But she was also precise enough to know that the bond did not manufacture the specific quality of these evenings, the particular satisfaction of being with someone who listened fully, and answered honestly, and did not ask her to be something other than what she was. The bond could explain the pull. It could not explain why the pull had direction and texture and felt more like recognition than attraction. She filed this away to examine later. The nights were getting colder. She noticed this not from discomfort. The temperature regulation that had come with the change meant she was comfortable in conditions that would have required a heavier jacket 2 months ago, but from the particular quality of the cold air and what it carried. The smell of October going deeper into itself, the forest beginning its annual process of letting things go, dead leaves and cold stone, and the first hint of wood smoke from somewhere a mile or more to the east, someone with a fire going in the early evening. She had not called Clara. This was the thing she would think about in the mornings, in the first clear-minded hour after she woke, before the training day started. Clara, who was probably doing exactly what she always did when Lena went quiet for too long, not panicking, because Clara did not panic, but noting it carefully and deciding on the right moment to act. Clara, who would be patient for exactly as long as she judged patience was appropriate, and then would call, and would say something like, "Okay, I am going to need you to tell me what is happening," in the particular voice she used for things she had already decided to handle. She thought about what she would say when that call happened. She had no clear idea yet. She had a life now that had no language in their shared vocabulary. She would need to find language for it before she could begin the conversation. She thought about the brother who had been the loudest person in any room. She thought about what it was to lose the person who had been like that for you. The specific loss of a person whose very volume had been a kind of guarantee that they were there. Clara, who was the loudest person Lena had ever been close to. Clara, who always knew exactly where she was. She looked out at the dark forest and thought, I need to call her. Not yet, but soon. Once I understand what I am well enough to explain it to someone who loves me. The training began formally on the 8th morning, and she did not understand until the 3rd session what she had agreed to. He told her the night before, simply and without preamble. The ground control exercises were a foundation, not a structure. She needed to develop what she carried the way any physical capability was developed, with progressive resistance, with consistency, with the deliberate application of difficulty until new capacity grew. She said that sounded right. He said it would also be harder than anything she had done in the forest so far. She said she had managed hard work before. He looked at her in the considering way he had, the way that meant he was deciding not to say something, and said, "All right, first light." She was in the clearing before the sky was fully light. He was already there. He worked her hard from the beginning, and without cruelty, which was a distinction she came to appreciate clearly over the days that followed. There was nothing careless in how he pushed her. Every scenario was specific. He would create a condition that forced the wolf to respond. A sudden loud noise, a scent he introduced into the clearing, a physical challenge that triggered the instinct to shift, and then demand that she redirect the response, guide it, choose what it did, rather than simply experiencing whatever it decided to do. He tested her strength against obstacles that should have stopped her, and noted the results with a calm, measuring expression. She pushed back. This surprised him, which surprised her. On the 2nd day, she refused a repetition of a drill she had identified as reinforcing the wrong pattern. It was teaching her to suppress the wolf rather than to coexist with it, she explained. And suppression was a short-term solution that would create worse problems in a month. She proposed a modification that would achieve the intended goal without the unintended consequence. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Show me." She showed him. He incorporated the change into the following session without comment, which took her a day to recognize as a form of respect that she found she valued more than explicit acknowledgement would have been. The sessions ran long. Some evenings, she came back to the cabin genuinely tired, her body having found an actual limit for once, which was a new experience given what the past weeks had done to her sense of what a limit was. On those evenings they sat on the porch afterward, and he answered her questions about what they had done, and why, and the conversations expanded from the training into the broader world, the history of the pack governance structures, the politics of territory disputes, the things that were settled law, and the things that were still contested. She learned a great deal in those evenings. She also learned, in them, that he was capable of a relaxation she had not seen in him during the training sessions. He did not become a different person. He was always himself, always precise and contained. But something in him set down a fraction of its usual vigilance when they were simply talking. She noticed this the way she noticed any data point that did not fit the expected pattern, carefully, without yet knowing what to do with the information. On the 12th day, he pushed her through a session that started before dawn and did not end until late in the afternoon. She had been warned the previous evening that it would be long. She had been ready. She had been right about ready, and wrong about what ready would feel like by the end of it. She finished the last sequence of the day. She sat down in the grass to catch her breath, and had some intention of getting up again in a few minutes. She did not get up. She woke inside the cabin, in the back bedroom, on the narrow cot with a blanket over her. The room was dark. Night had come while she slept. The wood stove was going in the main room, and its warmth was moving through the wall. She lay still for a moment, and then got up quietly and went to the doorway of the main room. Kalian was in the chair beside the window, the one that faced the tree line. He was not reading. He was not doing anything she could name. His forearms rested on his knees, and he was looking at the dark forest outside the window, and his posture was completely different from anything she had seen from him during the day. The controlled, settled stillness of his working hours, the quality of someone managing their presence in a space, was gone. What was there instead was something quieter, the stillness of a person who believed they were unobserved and had let something down for a moment, set aside the management of themselves. He looked tired, not the physical tiredness of someone who had worked hard. The other kind, the tiredness that sits deeper than the body and comes from carrying something without respite. And there was something in the angle of his head and the set of his shoulders that she recognized because she had seen it in herself in mirrors during the worst of the months after Wyoming. A long-accustomed, well-managed, deeply ordinary loneliness, the kind that a person has learned to live with so efficiently that they have mostly stopped noticing it, except in moments like this one, when they are alone and unguarded and it surfaces. She stood in the doorway for a moment before he became aware of her. He turned when he heard her, and the composed version of himself settled back into place so quickly and so smoothly that she could have missed it if she had not been watching for exactly that shift. "How long did I sleep?" she asked. "About 4 hours. You carried me inside. The ground was cold, and you needed the rest," he said, as though this were a perfectly ordinary sentence that required no further explanation. She went to the kitchen and put the kettle on and came back with 2 cups. She sat across from him and handed him one, and he took it, and the naturalness of the exchange, no ceremony, no acknowledgement, just 2 people who had been sharing a porch for nearly 2 weeks, said something to her that she was not quite ready to translate. "Tell me something true," she said, "not about wolves or training, about yourself." He looked at her over the cup, a long pause, long enough that she thought about what it meant that he had chosen to do that, to carry her inside rather than wake her and have her walk in herself. It was not a decision that required deliberate thought, she understood. He had looked at the situation, her asleep in the grass after an unusually demanding session, the ground cold and damp, the cabin close, and he had acted on the obvious correct response without performing it, and without needing acknowledgement for it. That was the kind of person he was. She had been learning the contours of that kind of person for nearly 2 weeks, and what she kept finding was that the contours were consistently what they appeared to be. There was no gap between who he was when he thought he was being observed and who he was in the dark with no one watching. She found this. She admitted this only to herself, in the private accounting she kept of things she was not yet ready to say aloud. More disarming than anything else about him. She thought he would redirect the way he often did when a question became personal. And then he said, "This is the longest I have stayed in one place in 11 years. She looked at him steadily. "Why 11 years? "Because the work I do does not allow staying," he said. "What work?" "The work I will tell you about when the time for that conversation is right," he said, which is a genuine promise, not a deflection. She held his gaze. It sounds like one, she said. It is one, he said simply. They sat in the warm cabin, with the fire going, and the dark forest outside the window, and drank the tea, and she thought about the loneliness she had seen on his face before he knew she was watching, and about 11 years of not staying anywhere, and about the particular quality of tiredness that settles into a person who has been responsible for something very large, for a very long time, with no one beside them. She was going to know the reason for all of it. She was patient, and she was thorough, and she was going to know. But not tonight. Tonight she was tired, and the tea was warm, and he was across from her with both hands around his cup, and the quiet between them was not empty. She kept that. She would think about it in the morning when things were clearer. Tonight she would simply be where she was, which was somewhere she had not expected to find herself when she drove north 3 weeks ago, and which was, she acknowledged this privately, with the precision she brought to things she was not yet ready to examine in the open, somewhere she was glad to be. The morning the delegation arrived, 17 days after Kalian Voss had first spoken to her from the tree line, Lena was in the yard with coffee watching 2 birds argue over the same branch. She heard them coming before she saw them. The sound of multiple people moving through the forest, organized, deliberate, spread across more than one approach route. She set the coffee mug on the porch railing and turned toward the tree line. They came through from 3 directions over the space of about 90 seconds, 12 people in total, filtering into the yard and positioning across the surrounding area, with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this kind of thing many times and knew exactly what each person's role in it was. She stood very still. The shed door opened, and Kalian walked into the center of the yard at his usual pace, and every one of the 12 people stopped moving and lowered their eyes. Not simultaneously. In a wave, the closest ones first, spreading outward. Not a bow, not anything that would have been visible as a formal gesture to someone who did not know what they were looking at. Just the eyes dropping, a slight forward inclination of the head, the body language of people who are in the presence of something significantly above them, in an order they cannot argue with and do not wish to. All 12. At once, at the sight of him. Lena stood at the edge of the yard and watched this happen, and felt the picture she had been building complete itself in a single moment. The person who appeared to be leading the group was a tall man, with close-cut gray hair named Owen. She would learn his name in the next few minutes. He addressed Kalian with a careful respect that made Dale's deference look like ordinary friendliness. Not fawning, not nervous. The precise, economical address of someone who is very good at their work, and is speaking to the person whose work encompasses theirs. 2 of the 12 had already positioned themselves at the property's perimeter, in the pattern she recognized as a boundary watch. 2 more were moving through the tree line to the north, in a methodical circuit she identified as an area clearance. These people had not come to visit. They had come to secure a location. For him. She waited until Owen had finished speaking, and Kalian turned and walked back across the yard toward her. And then she said, "Who are they?" "Members of my pack," he said. "There is a situation in the area requiring attention. They are here to assist with it." "Your pack," she said. She looked at the 12 people, moving with practiced coordination, across and around the property, and then back at him. "Kalian." He met her eyes. "I asked you 2 weeks ago about the authority you carry," she said. "I asked why Dale deferred to you. I asked who sent you to find me, and why you specifically. You gave me partial answers to every single one of those questions, and I let it go, because I was practical about it. I am not being practical about it now. I want the full answer." He looked at her for a moment. "Walk with me," he said. They crossed to the far side of the clearing, out of the hearing of the others, and he stopped and turned to face her with the quality he had, when he had made a decision, and was executing it, rather than responding in the moment. "My full name is Kalian Aldrich Voss," he said. "I am the current head of the Voss bloodline, one of the oldest shifter lineages on this continent, 11 generations in a specific role within shifter governance. The appropriate title, in our world, would be Prince." She looked at him. "Prince," she said. "Yes." She looked at the yard, where Owen was directing 2 of the others with the quiet precision of someone who had been doing exactly this for many years. She looked back at Kalian. "Is that the complete answer?" He held her gaze. "It is today's answer," he said. She heard this exactly as it was meant. Another careful partial truth, placed to give her something while keeping something larger blocked from view. She filed it alongside everything else she had collected and said, "What is the situation in the area that requires 12 people?" He explained. The rogue activity had shown signs of coordination over the past week. Organized movement patterns, communication, a structure that lone rogues did not typically possess. Owen's group was here to investigate and handle it. She did not need to be involved. Her training should continue. She nodded and went inside. She sat at the kitchen table for a while and thought. Then she went back to the work she had been doing before they arrived, because the work was her own, and she was not going to let it slip, because of the unsettled feeling that was sitting in her chest. She was building what she needed to build. She was learning what she needed to learn. Whatever else was true, those things were hers. Nora was one of the 12. Lena had been glad to see a familiar face among the strangers when the delegation arrived, and she and Nora had spoken briefly in the yard during the afternoon, while the others were occupied. That evening, after the dinner hour, Nora knocked on the cabin door. "Can I come in?" Nora asked. Lena stepped back from the door. "Of course." Nora sat at the kitchen table and wrapped both hands around the cup of tea Lena put in front of her. She had the look of someone who had decided to say something and was organizing how to say it, rather than whether to say it. Lena sat across from her and waited. "There is something I think you should know," Nora said. "Not because anyone sent me here, because I think you deserve to have the information, and I am not certain anyone else is going to give it to you." "All right," Lena said. "You feel a pull toward him," Nora said. "Towards Kalian. I can see it, and he can see it, and I think you have been managing it very carefully, without yet knowing what it is." She paused. "What you are feeling has a name." Lena said nothing. She was listening. "Among our kind, it is called the mate bond," Nora said. "It is old. Older than the pack laws, older than the written records of our history. It is not simply attraction, and it is not simply comfort or respect, though it contains both of those things. It is the wolf in you, recognizing the wolf in him as its other half. It is a recognition that happens below the level of choice. It is rare, even among wolves who live full lives in this world. But when it happens, it is not subtle, and what you have been feeling since the morning in the clearing is exactly what it is." The kitchen was very quiet. The fire in the stove made its small sounds. Outside, the October forest was dark and still. "And him?" Lena said. "Does he feel it?" Nora met her eyes steadily. "He has felt it since he first saw you in that clearing," she said. "I am as certain of that as I am of anything I know." "Then why hasn't he said so?" Nora was quiet for a moment, weighing something. "That," she said, "is a question for him, and I think somewhere you already have an instinct about part of the answer, the part that is about the title, and what the title costs a person, in terms of ordinary things." After Nora left, Lena sat at the table for a long time. She thought about the mate bond. She thought about the pull she had felt from the very first morning, before she had heard him speak, before she had seen his face, when he was only a tall figure in the shadows at the edge of the clearing. She thought about every evening on the porch. She thought about the night she had watched him in the chair with his guard down and recognized the loneliness in him, because she knew what it looked like from the inside. She thought about all of it with the careful, column-based attention she brought to data she was not yet sure how to classify, and she thought, he knew about me. She did not yet know how entirely right that instinct was. She began to pull back, not dramatically, not in any way she could have named cleanly. She was simply a little more contained in the evenings over the following days, a little less likely to open the personal questions, a little more formal in her manner than the porch evenings had produced between them. She could feel herself doing it, and she could not entirely stop it, because the bond was real, and the realness of it made her careful, in a way she could not explain, without also explaining that she had been told about it by someone else first, which would require explaining that she had not said anything about it to him, which would require explaining why. She needed to know more before she could proceed honestly. She needed the actual information. She drove north. She thought about what it meant to be driving back north rather than continuing south. She had left in the dark with her bag packed and her decision made and her anger real and justified, and now she was reversing that decision before the sun was fully up on the following day, and the reversal felt not like defeat, but like the natural completion of something that had needed to work itself through. She had needed to leave. She had needed the road and the distance and the particular clarity that came from putting herself on the far side of something and seeing what it looked like from there. She had seen what it looked like. She had made her accounting, and the accounting came out the way she had known, somewhere underneath the anger, that it was going to come out. She drove north, with the windows cracked, because she slept better with moving air, even here, even now. She had said it that first morning without hesitation, "There is a cabin," and she had done it without hesitation, had turned off the paved road and up the dirt road with the same clean automaticity she used for every field decision she was certain about. That quality of certainty was one of the things she valued most about herself. She trusted it in the forest, and she trusted it in her work, and she had learned, slowly, to trust it in the larger decisions of her life, even when the certainty arrived before the reasoning. She was certain about this. She was going back. She was angry, and she was going back, which was not a contradiction. Both things could be fully true at the same time, and she was adult enough to hold both of them, without needing to resolve the tension before she could act. She would deal with the anger. She would deal with the conversation that needed to happen, and the things that needed to be said, and heard, and decided. She would deal with all of it, because the alternative was to keep driving south, and the idea of keeping driving south felt like the wrong thing in the deep, specific way that only a few decisions in her life had felt wrong. Clearly, immediately, without needing to argue herself into the feeling. She turned the truck around at the next intersection and drove north. She went out the following morning and ran 5 miles before the sun fully cleared the ridge, partly because the wolf needed the movement, and partly because she was burning through something that had no other good outlet. When she came back to the cabin, she found Nora sitting on the porch steps waiting for her, which she had not expected, and which she understood immediately meant there was more to say. Nora said, "I should have told you something else last night." Lena sat down on the steps beside her. "Go ahead." "The reason he has not said anything," Nora said, "is not the one you might assume. It is not fear of rejection. It is not strategy. It is something older than either of those things." She paused, choosing her words. "Kalian has been the Alpha King since he was 22 years old. 14 years. In 14 years, every relationship he has had with another person has been defined first by what he is, and second, by who he is. Everyone who matters to him knows his title before they know his voice. There is no version of his life in which someone has chosen to know him without knowing what they are choosing first." She looked at Lena steadily. "Until you." Lena said nothing. She looked at the tree line and let this settle. "You did not know," Nora said. "You chose to trust him, chose to open your evenings to him, chose to let him into the private space you normally keep, very carefully managed. You chose all of that based on what you observed and felt, not on what he represents. For him, that is." She paused again. "I imagine it is something he has not been given before. Something he did not know how to handle without breaking it." Lena thought about the night she had watched him in the chair, and what his face had looked like when he did not know she was there. "He should still have told me," she said. "Yes," Nora said simply. "He should have." They sat on the steps in the morning cold for a while without speaking. Below them in the yard, one of Owen's team was running some kind of quiet perimeter check with the unhurried efficiency of someone doing routine work. The forest beyond the yard was very still. A bird called once and then was quiet. "Thank you for coming back," Lena said finally. Nora stood up. "Of course," she said. "That is what the people you can trust actually do." And she could feel, with the precision that the enhanced senses had given her for reading the subtle changes in people's affect, that Kalian knew something had shifted. He gave her space without being asked to, which was the right thing to do, which somehow made it worse. She found out at 2 in the morning, and she found out by accident. She could not sleep. She had been lying in the back bedroom with her eyes on the ceiling for an hour, her mind running in the careful, organized loops that were impossible to turn off once they started. She got up for water the way she did on the restless nights, and went to the kitchen in the dark, and poured a glass at the sink. The window above the sink was cracked an inch, the way she kept it, because the fresh night air made the cabin feel less sealed, and through that inch of open window, in the complete stillness of the mountain night, she could hear 2 voices from the shed. Kalian's voice, and Owen's. She was not trying to listen. She was at the sink with her glass, and the voices were there, clear as the creek from 300 yards. The first sentence she consciously processed, stopped her where she stood. Owen said, "She is progressing faster than you expected." And Kalian said, quietly and without hesitation, "She is progressing exactly as I expected." She set the glass down on the counter with complete care. Owen said, "You knew before the bite, and it was not a question." A pause. Then Kalian. "The bloodline markers were identified 3 months ago. A field researcher in Millbrook, working within a rogue active territory for nearly a year, with no incidents. The silver coat on her first shift confirmed the initial assessment. Yes, I knew before I introduced myself." Owen. "She does not know." Kalian. "No." Owen. "When are you going to tell her?" A pause. A long pause, the longest she had heard from him. And then, very quietly, "When I know how." Lena stood in the dark kitchen and let the information arrange itself in the part of her mind that dealt in facts rather than feelings. He had known about her before the bite, not stumbled upon her, not tracked the rogue and found her by chance. He had been in Millbrook specifically because of her, because of something he had known about her, and he had introduced himself as someone who had been in the forest tracking a rogue and happened to find her in the middle of it, and he had been choosing not to tell her the truth of it for 17 days. She had told him about her grandmother and the cabin, and Clara, and the biology teacher, and the wolf sanctuary in 10th grade. She had shared her evenings, and her questions, and the careful private space she normally kept clear of other people, and he had been managing information the entire time. She did not slam drawers, she did not stand in the kitchen processing feelings. She went to the back bedroom and packed her bag with the focused efficiency of 4 years of field work. Clothes, notebook, the essential things, nothing more. She took her truck keys from the hook by the door. She went out the back way, around the far side of the cabin, and away from the shed window, reached the truck, and started the engine. She drove down the dirt road and onto the highway and headed south. She drove fast. The highway was empty, and the headlights cut a clean path through the dark, and she pushed the truck to the top of the speed she could manage on these curves. She did not think, because thinking required a steadiness she did not currently have, and she would think properly once she had enough miles between herself and the mountain. What she could not stop feeling was the bond. Now that she knew its name, there was no pretending it was something else. It was a physical ache that built with every mile she put south, a pressure in her chest that was not pain, but was unmistakably discomfort, the specific discomfort of moving steadily away from something that her entire body understood as necessary. She gripped the wheel and drove and managed it with the same deliberate, practiced attention she was learning to bring to anything that pulled at her when she had decided on a different direction. The highway at night was not what she needed it to be. She had thought, leaving the cabin in the dark, that the miles would help. That distance would clarify something, that by the time she reached Clara's apartment in Portland, she would have processed the anger into something with cleaner edges, something she could work with, rather than something that was simply there, large and hot and formless. The miles were not helping. The bond was an ache that started in her chest and radiated outward with each passing mile, not sharp, but persistent, the kind of discomfort that does not spike, but also does not fade. She had set the cruise control at a speed that was technically within the limit, and was gripping the wheel with her hands at the proper positions, and her eyes on the road. And underneath all of that, she was aware of the bond, the way she was aware of a splinter, a small, specific location of wrongness that her attention kept returning to no matter what she directed it toward. She thought about Clara. She needed to make that call. She had been telling herself she would make it for 6 months, and she understood why she kept not making it. It would require language she was still finding. It would require giving Clara enough of the truth that Clara would want to come. And once Clara came, these two worlds would be in the same place, and she would have to hold them both at once. She was ready for that now. The life she was living here was settled enough that she could let someone she loved into it, without feeling like she was exposing something still fragile. She would call this week. She committed to this, in the specific way she committed to things when she meant them, rather than when she was just thinking about them. She put it in the column of decided, rather than planned. She thought about what she would say. She had not rehearsed this conversation, because she had not known it was coming, had not allowed herself to consider it seriously, while she was still standing in the kitchen with the voices from the shed in her ears, and her bag not yet packed. She thought about Clara's voice on the phone 3 weeks ago. "Lena, are you okay? You sound strange." And about what she had said in response. which was fine. I'm just tired, which was the thing she said when she did not want to have the real conversation yet. She had driven north 3 weeks ago to get away from people, and she had found one person and let him in. She had done this deliberately, step by step, decision by decision, and now she was driving south at 11 at night with a bruised shoulder from the ground exercises and the bond pulling at her chest and her notebook on the passenger seat beside her, and she was trying to decide whether what she was feeling was betrayal or the more complicated thing that was adjacent to betrayal, but different from it. He had known about her. He had come to Millbrook because of her. Everything after that had been real. She was certain of this, in the deep, specific way she was certain of field data that she had collected herself, with her own eyes, over sustained time. But the beginning had not been what it appeared to be, and the beginning mattered, because beginnings were the frame through which you understood everything that followed. She drove and she thought, and the bond ached, and the miles passed. At 200 miles, she pulled off at a rest stop and sat in the truck with the engine off, and the cold coming in through the window she cracked. And she did the thing she did when she needed to think clearly. She made a list. Everything he had told her that was true. Everything he had withheld. Everything she had felt that she was now certain was real. Everything she did not yet know. She made the list in her head rather than on paper, because the paper was in her bag, and the bag was in the back, and she did not want to move. The list was long. The true column was longer than the withheld column. She drove on. She made 230 miles by nightfall of the following day. She had been aiming for Portland, for Clara's apartment, and the first honest conversation she could imagine having with another person in weeks, and she thought she might stop somewhere in the middle distance and push the rest of the way tomorrow. She took a highway exit looking for gas and food, and drove into a small town with a main street and a gas station and a diner that had its lights on. She was turning into the gas station when her senses went alert. Wolves. Multiple wolves, and the disorganized, structureless quality of rogues. They were moving to cut off the road ahead of her and behind her simultaneously, closing in from 2 directions before she had fully processed what she was reading. She stopped the truck in the middle of the road. She could count them by scent before the headlights found the first figure. 4, 5, a 6th, coming from an angle behind the truck. They came out of the shadows on both sides and from behind, and they moved with a coordination that was wrong for what rogues were supposed to be capable of. Someone had organized them. Someone had given them a target and a timing. She got out of the truck. She had more options outside than in a metal box. She fought from the first second with everything she had built over the past 18 days of training, efficiently and without wasted effort, using her speed and the way she had learned to read how a body moved before it completed its motion. 2 went down in the first minute, which was fast, and which told her she was better than she had known, which would have been gratifying under different circumstances. She took hits and managed them, not avoiding them entirely, which was not possible, but placing them where they would damage her least, which was a skill that felt very recently acquired, and was proving very immediately useful. But there were more than 4. There were more than 6. They kept coming from the 3rd direction, from the angle she could not fully cover without exposing her back, and she was alone, in a strange town, in someone else's territory, and her energy was finite even now. The air changed. All of them stopped. Not gradually, not one by one, simultaneously, as though someone had hit a switch. The silence that fell was immediate and complete, and she had never heard it fall over that many bodies at the same instant. She straightened from her fighting stance and looked toward the south end of the road. Kalian was walking toward them from the dark. Owen was 2 steps behind him. They were moving at his ordinary pace, which was not hurried, which was not hesitant, not running. Walking, the way a person walks when they know exactly what they are about to do and do not need to hurry about it. He walked past the first rogue without looking at it. He walked to the center of the group. He stopped. He did not speak. He did not shift. He stood in the middle of the road with both hands loose at his sides, and he simply existed in the space. And what happened next, she had not words for then, and would struggle to find words for afterward. The leader of the rogues, the one she had identified by the way the others looked to him during the fight, went to his knees on the pavement. In his human form, on his actual knees, his head bowing down toward the ground, with the compelled, helpless submission of something that has just encountered a force it cannot argue with, and is not capable of resisting. The others followed in seconds, some kneeling, some going flat. all of them down, all of them silent. What she had seen in the clearing with the single rogue 18 days ago had been a single candle flame. What she was watching now was the sun. She understood, for the first time, the actual difference between a prince and a king, and she understood that it was not a matter of degree but of category, that what she was looking at now, the complete and involuntary submission of 12 organized and motivated wolves, was the Alpha King's authority, at full capacity, unmuted, unmanaged, the thing itself. Owen directed the cleanup quietly and efficiently. The rogues were contained and moved off the road within minutes. Kalian turned and walked back to where she was standing beside her truck. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her, and the expression on his face was not entirely controlled for the first time since she had known him. Something had come loose in it, not grief, not relief exactly, but the specific expression of a person who has been preparing to find something terrible, and has instead found something that has undone the preparation. "No," she said, bruised, not hurt. He looked at her. She looked at him. The night was cold and quiet around them, and the stars were visible between the buildings of the small town, and there was a great deal to say, and neither of them said it. After a moment she sat down on the tailgate of her truck. After a moment, he sat down beside her. She said, "Tell me everything, all of it, right now, and do not leave anything out this time." He told her. He started where she had not yet been taken. 3 months before the bite, a researcher in the Shifter World's internal network had produced a report identifying bloodline markers in a human field researcher in Millbrook, Montana, someone who had been working within a territory that had sustained significant rogue activity for nearly a year, at a frequency and ease of movement that suggested the wolf in her ancestry was already present, dormant, inherited at a distance she could not have known about, but real. The report flagged the specific combination of factors as significant. The silver coat, if the shift were to occur, would confirm it. He had come to Millbrook to observe the situation, not to intervene, not to make contact, to understand, from a distance, whether the report was accurate. The rogue had intervened first. He had arrived the morning after the bite to find a newly turned wolf who had driven herself to the pharmacy, treated her own wound, gone back to work, and within 4 days had begun systematic self-observation in a private field notebook, who had recognized the significance of the crushed steel mug and quietly disposed of it, who had driven north to an isolated property rather than staying in a populated area, which was exactly right, who had managed her first full moon transformation alone, and shifted back to herself before dawn, which he had never seen in a newly turned wolf. "You should have told me," she said, not loudly, flatly. "Yes," he said. "You introduced yourself as someone tracking a rogue who happened to find me." "Everything I told you was accurate," he said. "I was tracking the rogue. I was in the area because of the rogue. I did not tell you the reason I was specifically in Millbrook initially, and I did not tell you who I was, and both of those things were omissions that you had the right to know about." She looked at the small town's main street in the dark. A light was on in the diner. Somewhere further down a dog was making an announcement about something. "What is it you did not tell me? What you told me about your bloodline, the prince title, is that the full version?" He looked at the street for a moment. "No," he said. "Then tell me the full version." "The Voss bloodline has held a specific role for 11 generations," he said. "Not a regional role, not a leadership role within a single pack or a set of allied packs. The role that sits at the top of the entire governance structure for shifters on this continent. The role that the governance of every pack and every territory ultimately answers to." He paused. "The Alpha King. That is what I am. I have carried the title for 14 years. Lena was quiet. She sat on the tailgate of her truck in the dark of a small town's main street and put the pieces together against everything she already knew. The way the rogue in the clearing had dropped. The way 12 organized wolves had lowered their eyes in a wave at the sight of him crossing a yard. The way Dale had deferred and Owen had spoken, and the rogues on this road had gone to their knees. She had been building the picture piece by piece for weeks, and she had known it was pointing at something significant, but she had not known it pointed at this. The top, the entire structure, every pack and every territory. "You traveled as a prince," she said. "Because the Alpha King cannot move quietly," he said. "He cannot track a rogue or make contact with a newly turned wolf in a remote area without the full weight of the position preceding him. The security, the protocol, the way every room rearranges itself before he enters it. Kalian Voss, who is a prince of an old bloodline and has relevant experience, that person can go where he needs to go and have conversations he needs to have, without shutting down every interaction before it starts. I have been moving this way for years. It is not deceptive. Every part of it is true, but it is not the full truth. She said nothing. She was listening. There is something else, he said. In the Voss archive there is a set of texts, very old, predating the written governance structure by several generations. They describe a specific occurrence, a wolf of dormant bloodline, turned under specific conditions, who shifts clean on the first full moon. A silver wolf. The texts call this wolf the king's anchor. They describe what it means when such a wolf exists alongside an alpha king. That together, the bond between them makes both stronger than either would be alone, in a way that the texts call unassailable. He paused. The researcher's report described a dormant bloodline field researcher in Millbrook. The silver coat on your first shift confirmed it. Everything the texts describe, the dormant bloodline, the rogue bite, the clean first shift, you match it exactly. She looked at him. You came here because of a prophecy in an old text. I came here because the research report was compelling, and I wanted to understand it, he said. That is true. And then I stood in that clearing at dawn, and saw you come back to yourself, and the mate bond arrived without any decision on my part. And from that moment, I was not here because of anything written in an archive. But you did not tell me, she said. No. He was quiet for a moment. And this is the part I cannot make seem rational, though I understand that it is not the same thing as rational. I have been the Alpha King for 14 years. For 14 years, every room I enter is arranged around the title before I arrive. Every person I speak with is aware of it before they are aware of me. Every choice anyone makes in relation to me is made with full knowledge of what I represent. That is correct and appropriate, and I understand why it has to be that way. He looked at her directly. You chose to be around me because of what you observed over 17 days, he said. Because of what you felt and what you saw. Every evening on the porch, every question you asked, every moment you gave me, you gave it to me. Not to the Alpha King, not to the bloodline or the title or the mate bond. To me, the person sitting across from you. And I held on to that longer than I should have, because I have not had something like that in a very long time, and I did not know how to give it up willingly. The night was cold around them. Somewhere up the road, Owen was finishing what needed finishing. The stars were out between the buildings. Was any of it real? She said. Her voice was even. The porch. Your brother. The evenings. Was that you? Or was it something you were performing because you needed me to stay, so you could manage the situation? He did not hesitate. Every single moment of it was mine, he said. Every word I said to you on that porch was true. Every evening I was there because I wanted to be there. What I withheld was the title, and the reason I was in Millbrook initially. What I gave you was real, all of it. She sat with this. The truth of it had a quality she recognized, the quality of data that confirms a hypothesis she had already formed, without consciously naming it. She had known, at some level she had been unwilling to examine directly, that the porch evenings were real. She had felt their realness in the present tense of living them. The anger was not about the reality of what had been given. It was about the concealment of context she had needed to make her own fully informed choices. Those were different things. What do you personally want? She said. Not the prophecy. Not the governance requirement. Not the mate bond. You, as the person who grew up in the mountain northwest and had a loud younger brother. What do you want? He looked at her for a moment, and then he said her name. Just her name, and nothing after it. And the way he said it, without management, without the careful control she had come to know so well, contained everything she needed to hear. The want in it was real, and it was his, and it was directed at her specifically, and not at anything she represented. She sat with that for a long time. The night moved around them. Owen worked. The cold deepened. The dog down the street had finished its announcement. And Lena Carver, who had packed a bag at 2 in the morning in a state of reasonable fury, and had driven 230 miles south, and had fought 6 rogues on a dark road in a town she did not know, sat on the tailgate of her truck, and felt the mate bond settle in her chest, with its quiet, unargued certainty. and felt her own certainty sitting beneath it. She thought, these two things are not in competition. What I am to myself, and what I am toward him, are not in conflict. They are the same direction. She did not say yes to anything out loud. Not yet. The particular quality of the silence between them, in the small town's dark main street, was different from any silence she had experienced with him before. The other silences, in the cabin, on the porch, in the clearing during training, had been working silences. Silences full of the quiet transaction of two people growing familiar with each other. This one was different. This one had the quality of a held breath, of two people standing on either side of a door that was about to open. She was aware that she was angry. She was aware that the anger was real and justified, and was not going to simply dissolve because he had explained himself. She was also aware, with the same precision she brought to field assessment, that anger was not the only thing she was feeling. The mate bond had been aching all the way down the highway, not metaphorically aching, not in the way that people use the word casually, but a genuine physical discomfort that had built with distance and had been releasing with every mile back north, and was now, with him sitting beside her on this tailgate, almost entirely quiet. She thought about what Nora had said on the porch the previous morning, the part about him never having been chosen without his title, about 14 years of rooms that rearranged around him before he arrived. She thought about the expression on his face in the chair beside the window, and thought about 11 years of not staying anywhere, and thought about what a person becomes after that much time carrying something that large with no one to set it down with. She was angry. She was also, somewhere beneath the anger, and not competing with it, already certain about what she was going to do. "You are going to be completely honest with me from this point," she said. "Everything." "Yes," he said. "And you are not going to make decisions about what I am ready to know." "No," he said. "And you are going to tell me when something matters, even when you are not certain how I will respond." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for a long moment, taking the full measure of his expression. The absence of deflection, the absence of management, something in his eyes that was simply his own, unmediated. She thought, I have been feeling this since the first morning. I have been moving toward this since before I had a name for it. The fact that he hid things does not change what is true underneath the hiding. "All right," she said, "let's go." And she meant it in every sense of the words. But she did not get back in the truck. She did not continue toward Portland. She said, after a long silence, "I need some time to be angry about this." "I know," he said. "And then we are going to do this differently." "I know," he said again. "Starting with you not deciding unilaterally what I am ready to know and when," she said. "Yes," he said, and he meant it. "All right," she said. "Then let's go." The compound was nothing like what she had been half imagining, which told her that she had been imagining from the wrong frame of reference. She had been thinking in terms of fortification, something that announced the authority it held in stone and scale, something that made visible what it protected. What she found instead was a large private property set in a mountain valley, wide grounds and well-maintained buildings, and a main house of dark timber and stone that was significant in size without being designed to impose. The forest came close on two sides, and a river ran along the northern boundary. From the outside, and at first approach, it looked like a very well-maintained private estate, belonging to a family with both money and taste. The difference was the people. They were everywhere, not in large visible groups but in the constant movement between buildings, the particular quality of alert, purposeful presence that she had learned to recognize over the past weeks. Pack wolves, moving through the day's work with the shared body language of people who had spent years in proximity and had stopped needing to announce their awareness of each other. Owen met them at the gate and walked them in. He introduced her to several people in the first hour. Petra, the compound's senior elder, a woman in her late 60s, with the most controlled physical stillness Lena had encountered since Kalian himself, and eyes that had been assessing the world for a very long time and had stopped finding it surprising. Cole, who managed the compound's operational logistics, compact, efficient, careful in his address of her in the specific way of someone withholding judgment until they had enough data to form a real one. Mara, perhaps 40, who had the expression of someone who had been responsible for things for long enough that responsibility had become the default arrangement of her face. She was. Everyone in this compound knew within 24 hours of her arrival the Alpha King's confirmed mate. She could see it accounted for in the subtle calculations behind people's eyes when they looked at her. She prepared for what this would produce, the way she prepared for any field condition she could identify in advance, by deciding how she intended to handle it before the handling was required, rather than reacting in the moment when it arrived. On the second morning, Cole stopped her in the yard with, "I have a direct question, if you are willing to hear it." She said, "Go ahead." He said, "What qualifies you to stand where you are standing?" She had heard versions of this question before, in different rooms and different registers. She knew what it was designed to test, which was not actually what it was pretending to ask. "Nothing yet," she said. "I have been a wolf for 6 weeks. I trained with Kalian for less than 3 of them. I do not know your laws well enough, and I have not yet done anything here that has earned a position. I am aware of all of that." She held his eyes. "I intend to change it. Do you have another question?" Cole looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said, and walked away. And the quality of his departure was not dismissal. It was the recalibration of someone who had received an answer different from the one they had prepared for, and was incorporating it. On the 4th morning, 2 of the compound's younger wolves approached her together, in the coordinated way that people approach when they have planned an action and are executing it. They challenged her claim on the Alpha's position and attention and time, her value to the pack beyond the biological fact of a bond she had not chosen. They made their case without physical aggression, with the particular sophistication of people making a political point rather than a territorial one. She let them finish completely. Then she said, "You are right that I have not earned anything here yet. You are right that the mate bond is not a qualification in itself. You are right to want more than a prophecy, as the justification for who stands next to the most important person in your world." She paused. "But I am not here because a text said I should be. I looked at everything I could observe about this situation, and everything I could observe about him, and I made a decision. The bond pulled me toward the decision. The decision was mine. Those are different things, and the decision is what matters." They left without responding, but the quality of their departure was thoughtful, rather than dismissive, which was what she had been working toward. Kalian was somewhere behind her during both of these exchanges. He watched without intervening, and without approaching her afterward, which was exactly right, which she had not had to ask for. He understood what she was doing, and he understood that his involvement would undermine rather than support it. She built her place in the compound from the ground up over the following weeks. The work she found herself doing at the compound was not the same work she had done in Millbrook, but it was the same kind of work, and the distinction mattered. In Millbrook she had catalogued what was there: animal movements, territory patterns, population counts. Passive observation, structured collection, the particular satisfaction of a data set that grew each day into something more complete than it had been the day before. What she found herself doing at the compound was different in its purpose, even when the methodology was similar. Here, the data was not about understanding what was there. The pack understood its own territory and its own patterns better than any external observer could, but about identifying what was not working, what the existing systems were missing, where the picture had gaps that were causing practical problems. Cole, after the first week, stopped bringing the territory management team's reports to Kalian, and started bringing them to her instead, not officially, not with any formal acknowledgement of what he was doing. He simply began leaving them on the corner of the desk she had claimed in the compound's main working space, and she began working through them and leaving her annotations on them, and at some point, the annotations were being incorporated into the actual management decisions, and they did not discuss any of this explicitly, because it did not need to be discussed. The work was the work. She understood that this was Cole's way of accepting her. He was not the kind of person who made social overtures or revised his assessment of someone through conversation. He revised his assessment through watching how a person did their work, and once the assessment was revised, he expressed it by giving more work, which was, she thought, actually a fairly reasonable approach. Petra was different. Petra accepted her from the 3rd day, with the quiet completeness of someone who had been watching people arrive and leave, and arrive again, for long enough to know immediately what kind of person was in front of her. She did not explain this acceptance, did not offer it as a gift or a statement. She simply included Lena in her evenings the way she included the people she had known for years, and let Lena find her way into the rhythms of those evenings at her own pace. She found, in those evenings with Petra, the education she had not known she needed, not the formal history, She had access to that through Kalian, and through the compound's records. The other kind. The story of specific people, and specific decisions, and specific consequences. The history that exists in the space between the formal record and what actually happened. The compound had been through difficult periods. Kalian had made mistakes. The pack had come through things that had cost them members, and shaped them toward what they currently were. She needed to know all of this, in order to understand what she was actually standing in, and Petra gave it to her without being asked. Which meant Petra had decided before Lena arrived that she was someone worth giving it to. She adapted her research work to the new setting, applying her fieldwork methodology to the study of wolf movement patterns in the surrounding territory, in a way that she could see was genuinely useful, and that several of the people who worked with territory management told her directly was better than what they had been doing previously. She trained every day with the compound's training group rather than alone in a clearing, and she was better than most of them after 6 weeks, which she noted without pride, because it was simply a data point. She sat with Petra in the evenings, and learned the compound's history, and the broader history she needed to understand her place within it. She asked every question she had, and pursued the answers with the directness that was simply her nature. She and Kalian built something real. It was slow and it was deliberate, and it was built on a foundation of honesty that cost them both something, because the previous foundation had not been honest, and repairing that required a quality of careful attention that ordinary relationships built from the beginning did not require. They talked about his role, and what 14 years of it had actually cost him in terms he had not said to anyone before. They talked about what she needed to remain herself, inside a community that was nothing like the solitude she had chosen 11 months ago. They talked about the 11 years of not staying anywhere, about what had made that feel like the only option, about what staying might eventually look like for someone who had been moving for so long. She did not perform belonging, she earned it, piece by piece, through work and consistency, and the simple daily fact of showing up as herself, rather than as a version of herself, calibrated to what the role seemed to require. She learned the compound in the way she learned any environment she was going to have to live and work in, by walking it thoroughly, by asking direct questions of the people who knew it best, by sitting in it at different hours and watching how it changed. She was not performing the role of someone settling in. She was actually settling in, which was different, and the difference was visible in the way she moved through the grounds after the first week versus the first day. Petra was the person she spent the most time with in those early weeks, outside of Kalian. Petra had a quality of patience that was not passive. It was the patience of someone who had watched a great many people do a great many things, and had learned to wait for the part that was actually worth paying attention to. She did not explain the compound's history to Lena as though she were a visitor. She explained it as though Lena were someone who was going to need the information in order to do her work properly, which was the correct framing, and which Lena responded to accordingly. She learned that the compound had been Kalian's primary residence for 8 years, that he had moved through 4 different locations in the 6 years before that the settling into this particular valley had been itself a kind of decision, a choice, to stop treating permanence as a risk. She filed this alongside the 11 years of not staying anywhere, and thought about how far 14 years of responsibility could take a person from the ordinary accumulation of a life. She said to Petra one evening, when they had been sitting together long enough that the conversation had gone past the informational into something more honest. What was he like before the title? Petra was quiet for a moment. I knew him briefly, before, she said. He was 21. He had his brother still, and his mother. He laughed more easily. He was, she considered, less precise. More given to moving through the world by instinct rather than calculation. A pause. He was not happier, exactly. He was less contained. There is a difference. Lena thought about the smile she had seen in the cabin, the one that appeared when he talked about his brother, the one that opened the room. She thought about how rarely she saw it, and what it cost him not to have it more. The title did not ruin him, Petra said, as though she had read the direction of the thought. It shaped him toward something that is genuinely itself, but things were lost in the shaping, the way things always are. On the 31st day, Cole found her at the territory mapping project she had restructured, and told her it was working better than the previous version. She said good. He said he had been wrong in his initial assessment of her. She said he had been cautious, and it was reasonable. On the 32nd day she was sitting in the main room in the evening with Kalian, both of them reading, the fire going, and she looked up at some point to find him watching her with the expression she had seen on his face in the cabin on the night he had not known she was watching, the expression that belonged to the room he usually kept closed. Open, unguarded, genuinely at rest. She said, "What are you thinking?" He said, "That I am very glad you did not keep driving." She looked at him for a moment, and looked back at her notes, and did not say what she was thinking, which was, "I love you." Not yet. But she held it, because it was true, and the time for it would come. She did not say it yet, but she held it carefully, the way she held all the things that were true and not yet spoken, in the part of herself that was patient and thorough and willing to wait for the right moment. The right moment would come. She was good at recognizing right moments. The warning came on a Tuesday morning. Until then, the evenings continued, notes and tea and the fire going, and the particular ease of two people who had stopped performing ease for each other and were simply in it, and she held what she knew and waited. The warning came on a Tuesday morning in November, delivered by Owen at breakfast, in the quiet, economical way that Owen delivered everything. No drama, just the information placed in front of the relevant person with complete accuracy. The Aldrich bloodline had formally called a summit. Lena heard this from her seat at the table, and looked up from her notes, and saw Kalian's stillness take on a specific quality. Not the ordinary stillness he wore through most of his days, but a slightly different version of it, the version that was not rest but readiness. She knew enough by now to understand what Aldrich meant. The bloodline that had contested Voss authority for 3 generations, observing and waiting for the specific kind of opening that made a successful challenge possible. A summit request was a formal move within the governance structure, the kind that required a formal response, that locked everyone into a particular arrangement of positions whether they wanted to be in it or not. Refusing to attend was itself a statement. Attending was its own kind of risk, because summits of this nature had a way of becoming something other than what they announced themselves to be. Kalian agreed to attend. He told her what the summit was and what it might involve, and said it was her decision whether to come. She said she was going. He nodded once, the way he nodded when he had already known what she would say. 40 people traveled from the compound, 6 hours south by a combination of driving and the last hour on foot through mountain terrain, to a neutral property owned by a family with no bloodline allegiances who hosted events of this kind for groups that needed ground no one claimed. It was a large facility set into the mountains, well designed for gatherings of significant size, with meeting rooms and a central hall and grounds large enough for the expected number of people. There were already representatives from several other packs and bloodlines present when Kalian's group arrived. Lena moved through the first hours of the gathering with the same attention she brought to new field environments, watching, cataloging, building her understanding of the room's architecture, both the physical architecture and the social one. She identified the Aldrich contingent before they arrived by the way the existing groups arranged themselves in subtle anticipation of them. When they came through the entrance 2 hours after Kalian's group, there were 22 of them, organized, well-positioned, carrying themselves with the collective confidence of people who had come here prepared, rather than hoping. Their leader, Aldrich, which was both the bloodline name and his individual name, an inheritance that had long since collapsed the two into one, was tall with pale eyes and the specific quality of charisma that performs its own confidence, rather than simply possessing it. He had the manner of someone who had spent decades being the most significant person in most rooms, and had recently decided to test whether a specific room would prove an exception. He looked at Lena the moment he entered the hall. Not at Kalian, at her. His eyes found her in the room, with the precise targeting of someone who had done research and knew exactly which face he was looking for. He held her gaze for a moment with an expression that was not threatening, but was not friendly either. It was the assessment of someone deciding how to classify a variable. She held his gaze for exactly as long as she needed to get the information she needed from it, and then looked away. She had things to do. The summit was structured as formal dialogue, protocols and speaking orders, and a neutral moderating elder named Roe, who was clearly both intelligent and aware that the room held something that could move badly, without much warning. Lena took her position in the Voss delegation behind Kalian, with Owen and Petra. Nora was on her left. Finn was further back in a position that she had noted and filed, because it told her something about what role Finn was expected to play if things went wrong. "He has not stopped watching you since he entered the room," Nora said quietly. I know, Lena said. He is deciding whether I am a variable he needs to account for. Are you? Nora asked. He is going to find that out, Lena said. The formal dialogue went on for 2.5 hours. The exchange was careful and structured, and underneath the carefulness and structure, it was the conversation of two sides of something that had not yet decided whether it was a negotiation or a declaration. She listened to what was said, and she listened to what was not said, and she watched the positioning of the Aldrich contingent in the room, with the particular kind of watching she saved for environments she needed to understand before she needed to act in them. She was watching the positioning when it changed. It happened without announcement. One moment, the room was engaged in the formal exchange, and in the next, the Aldrich contingent was moving, not all at once, staggered by design, some toward Kalian's position, and some toward the exits, and some toward the body of the Voss delegation. It was organized, it was fast, it was exactly what you did when you came to a summit, not to reach an agreement, but to change the situation by force, before anyone had a chance to prepare for force. The room became chaos, and Lena was moving, before it had fully become chaos, off her chair, and reading the room, with the same precision she had been reading it for the past 2.5 hours, but now with the full weight of her body and senses engaged, rather than held in reserve. Owen and Petra had Kalian's position. She trusted them for exactly this, completely and without reservation, which freed her to do something different. She read the deployment of the Aldrich group in the first 30 seconds of the chaos, and identified the thing that would change the math of the room. The eastern exit was blocked. Opening it gave the Voss group an extraction path. That was what she went for. She fought her way to it with everything she had built in 2 months of training. Not with bravado, not with performance, with the efficiency of someone doing a specific job in a limited amount of time. 2 wolves went down. The exit opened. She called Finn's name across the room, and he was already moving before she finished the word, because Finn had been watching the room the same way she had and knew exactly what she had achieved. She was turning to look for Kalian's position when she found Aldrich behind her. He was alone. His people were occupied across the room, and he had come to her personally, and she understood why before he had taken a second step toward her. She was the target. She had been the target since before the summit was called. The mate bond confirmed and solidified made Kalian's authority unassailable by any traditional means. Breaking the bond or removing her was the only viable approach, and with his people engaged elsewhere, Aldrich had decided to do it himself. She stood in the chaos of the room, facing the most powerful wolf from the opposing bloodline, completely alone. She was frightened. She named it clearly: fear, present, useful, and used it as information rather than noise. He moved toward her, and she moved, not backward but sideways, repositioning, buying herself the 2 seconds she needed to read him the way Kalian had taught her to read a stronger opponent. He was larger than her. He had decades of experience she did not have. He was fast and calculating and cold in the way that long-wielded power makes people cold. She had 4 years of reading how living things moved through space. She had 2 months of training that had never been comfortable. She had the precise knowledge of exactly what she could and could not do, which was more useful than a false estimate of either. She waited for the pattern. He was faster than she expected, and she adjusted mid-motion and took the hit higher than she had intended, her shoulder rather than her upper arm, and used the impact to redirect rather than absorb, guiding his momentum past her instead of through her. She came around behind him in the moment his recovery cost him, and reached the position she had been working toward, the one that gave her his balance, and not the other way around. She had learned in training that the most important thing about fighting a stronger opponent was not strength and not speed, but patience. The willingness to take the hit you had to take in order to reach the position you needed to be in. Every exchange she had worked through in the clearing behind the cabin had been a version of this lesson. You did not win by avoiding difficulty. You won by choosing which difficulties to accept and which to refuse. She accepted the hit to her shoulder, because accepting it got her behind him. She refused the angle on her left, because that angle would have cost her the balance she needed for what came next. She calculated this not consciously, not with anything that felt like thought, but with the particular automatic precision that 2 months of training had built into her body, the way a musician's hands know where to go before the conscious mind sends the instruction. She was better at this than she had known she was. She matched him through 4 more exchanges. She took hits efficiently, placing them where they would hurt without breaking anything that mattered. And she read him with the full attention of everything she had been given and developed since the morning she woke on a forest floor, and did not know what she was. The slight lag on his left side, the early commitment on each movement, the pattern that told her which moment was coming. She found it. He committed to her right. She went completely left, a fraction of a second before he completed the motion, wrong-footing him in the gap between his decision and his execution. She had her position behind him, with her arm across his throat, and her full weight in the leverage before he had finished the turn. She had him, she said, quietly, and with all the breath control she had left. He was still. She held the position without moving, without speaking again, without letting the silence work against her. She felt the calculation running in his body, the assessment of the position, the math of what each option cost him. She had his balance, and she had his angle, and she had done it cleanly enough that he knew it. He dropped. The controlled, deliberate dropping of a person who has made a decision, and is executing it with the same economy they bring to every decision. The word went through the room in a wave, and the fighting slowed and stopped in stages, the Aldrich Wolves standing down as their leader went to the floor, the Voss group holding their positions with the disciplined readiness of people who had been taught not to celebrate before the situation was fully resolved. The hall went quiet. Lena stepped back. She straightened. Her shoulder was deeply bruised, and there was a cut above her eyebrow she had not felt in the moment, and her hands were shaking with the fine tremor that comes after sustained, controlled intensity. She was breathing hard. She was standing. Kalian was 10 feet from her. He had come across the room at some point in the last exchange. She had not seen him come because she had been entirely focused on the one thing in front of her, and Owen was behind him, and he was looking at her with an expression she had never seen from him in any of the weeks she had known him. Not the controlled neutrality of his working hours, and not the unguarded moments on the porch, and not anything she had seen in between. Something that was all of those things at once, and completely beyond them. The full face of a person who had come prepared for the worst, and found something that had undone every preparation. He crossed the last 10 feet. He put his hand on her uninjured shoulder, very carefully, as if she were made of something fragile, which she was not. "I had it," she said. "I know," he said. "I saw the whole thing." She looked at him, at his face with the control gone from it, at everything she had been holding since the night in Montana when she had sat at the kitchen table after Nora left, and thought about what it meant to feel what she felt toward another person, and not know if it was safe to have felt it. She said, "I think I have been in love with you since somewhere around day 6. He looked at her for 1 second, 1 full second, and then he put his forehead against hers, very carefully, and she felt his exhale, long, slow, releasing something that had been under significant pressure for a long time. "Day 4, he said. "For me. I was trying to be responsible about it." She laughed, which surprised her, and she could feel from the slight change in his breathing that he was smiling. Behind them, Owen said, to no one in particular, in the most perfectly neutral voice she had ever heard from him, "I will go handle the Aldrich matter." She suspected, very strongly, that this was the happiest he had been in some time, and that he was managing it with considerable professionalism. 6 months after the summit, in the last week of April, Kalian told her he wanted to take her somewhere, and did not say where. He mentioned it in the evening simply, the way he said most things. She said yes before she finished the sentence, which was something she would not have done 8 months ago, and which told her something real about who she was now, relative to who she had been. He nodded and said early morning, and she said all right, and went to bed, and did not ask where they were going, because she was curious, in a way that felt pleasurable, rather than anxious, and that distinction was itself something she had not previously had access to. The compound had been home for 6 months now, in the actual sense of the word, rather than the technical one. She had her work, the territory mapping project, which she had expanded into a full research program that 3 other people now contributed to, and that was producing genuinely useful data for the first time in years. She had her training, which she continued because she liked it, and because there was always more to learn, and which had gone from necessary to something she would have chosen regardless. She had people she trusted, Petra, who had become something close to a friend in the unhurried way that 2 people who are both precise and somewhat private become friends. Nora, who had come back to the compound 6 weeks after the summit and stayed. Finn, who was impossible to not like, and who was also, she had confirmed, one of the sharpest observers she had ever encountered. She had Owen, who would never be warm toward her but who had stopped being cold, which from him was significant. She had Kalian. She had Kalian in the way that two people have each other when they have been honest about the difficult things, and have built something on that honesty, and have chosen each other daily rather than once. She had him as the person who was already at the kitchen table when she came down in the morning, and as the person who asked the right question after a frustrating meeting and actually listened to the answer, and as the person who occasionally laughed in the way he laughed, rare and unmanaged and sounding like the person he had been before the title had accumulated around him, and as the person who slept with the window open, even when it was cold, because she had mentioned once that she slept better when the night air came in. The compound in April was different from the compound in November. She had told Kalian about this quality of the compound in the early weeks, when she was still in the process of learning its rhythms, and he had listened with the specific kind of attention he gave to things she observed that he had not thought to look at from her angle. He said he had lived here for 8 years, and had stopped seeing the seasonal changes with the precision he had once seen them. She said that was what happened, when you knew a place too well without someone beside you to show you what you had stopped noticing. He had been quiet in the way he was quiet when something she said had landed somewhere specific, and then he had said, "That is exactly right." She thought about that conversation now as she walked the grounds in the April morning. It was one of the small ones, not a confession, or a revelation, or a moment that anyone would mark on a timeline of how they had gotten where they were. Just a true thing said and heard and kept. Those were the ones that added up. She had arrived in November when the grounds were bare, and the sky was the low flat gray of a mountain autumn running into winter, and everything had the quality of a system that was managing itself through a difficult season. April was the season running the other direction, the system expanding back toward its full capacity, green appearing in the places that had been brown, and the river along the northern boundary louder now, with the snowmelt coming down from the peaks. She noticed this with a specific quality of attention, not the attention of someone observing an environment, but the attention of someone who knows an environment and is tracking its changes. This was the distinction that mattered most to her about the 6 months that had passed. She had gone from observing this place to knowing it, from cataloging it to being part of what it was. She woke on the April morning with the particular clarity she had come to associate with days that were going to matter, and they drove north before the sun was fully up. She recognized the road within the first hour. It was the way the mountains arranged themselves, the specific profile of the western ridge against the sky, the smell of the elevation and the forest type, the quality of the light through the pines at this altitude. She watched it out the window and said nothing, and did not ask. The dirt road was where it had always been, turning off the secondary highway at the rusted gate marker she had driven past 100 times without noticing when she lived in Millbrook. He parked at the end of it. They walked the rest of the way on foot through trees she had run through in wolf form, on a night that now felt both very recent and very long ago, and the cabin appeared through the pines and she felt the layers of what it was, what it had been on that first night, a cold building that had never fully been hers, and what it was now, which was the beginning of everything. They went around the side to the clearing at the back. It was the same clearing. The April grass was sparse and pale, still recovering from the winter, but the clearing itself was unchanged, the same shape against the same tree line, the same sky above it, the same arrangement of pines at the edges casting the same long shadows. She stood in it, and felt what it was, to stand in a place that has accumulated the weight of what happened in it, without the place itself becoming anything other than what it has always been. Grass, trees, sky. The moon rose as the last light left the western ridge. She was standing in the center of the clearing when it appeared over the eastern ridge, full and brilliant white, the same moon that had appeared over this same ridge 8 months ago, and found her terrified and amazing, and already changed. It rose, and when its light fell across the grass in the clean angles she remembered, she felt in her chest the same pull she had felt on that first night, except it was not the same. It was calmer, more familiar, a greeting from something she now knew, rather than an announcement of something she was only beginning to understand. She heard Kalian move behind her. She turned. He was on one knee in the grass. Not arranged ceremonially, no formality to it, no preparation of the setting, no performance of the moment. He was simply on one knee in the April grass in his jacket and the moonlight, And he was looking up at her, not as an alpha king, and not as the confirmation of a prophecy, and not as anything other than the specific person who had been at a kitchen table every morning for 6 months, and knew she slept better with the window open. I have been the alpha king for 14 years, he said. I carried it alone, because I believed that was the shape of it, that the role was the whole thing, that there was not room inside it for the other kind of life, the ordinary kind, with a porch and evenings and someone to tell things to. He looked at her steadily. I was wrong about that. I understood. I was wrong the morning I stood at the edge of this clearing and watched you come back to yourself in the grass, and I have understood it more clearly, with every month since then. She stood in the moonlight and listened. I am not asking you to be the Alpha King's mate, he said. I am not asking you to be an anchor, or a fulfillment of a text, or any version of yourself that belongs to anything other than yourself. I am asking you, Lena, who drove north at 4 in the morning and was methodical and precise and completely herself about every impossible thing she found there, if you will be in this with me, the real version of it, not the version the role requires, just us. She stood in the April clearing in the Montana mountains and thought about who she had been the first time she stood in this clearing, exhausted and frightened and amazed, and already becoming something she could not yet name. She thought about who she was now, about the distance between those two people, and what it had cost to cover it, and what it had given her in the covering. She thought, what I am to myself, and what I am toward him, are not in competition. They have never been in competition. They are the same direction, pointing the same way. She said, stand up. He stood. She put her hand against his face, cold from the April night, entirely itself, the face she had been reading for 8 months and still found new things in, and she said, I have been in this since day 4. I have been waiting for you to catch up to yourself. He put his hand over hers. He was smiling, fully, without managing it, the smile that opened the room. She thought she would spend the rest of her life being glad she had learned what that smile looked like. I love you, she said. Not the crown, not the title. You, specifically. The person who has the window open even in winter, because I sleep better that way. You. He said it back without hesitation, without decoration, the way true things are said when the person saying them has decided not to manage how it sounds, and it landed in her the way those things land, not with ceremony, just completely. The moon was up. The clearing was white and silent. She shifted. Not because the moon required it. She had been past involuntary shifts for 5 months. She shifted because she wanted to. Because this clearing was where it had begun, and it felt right to be here, in the form that had been born here. Because the silver wolf wanted to run through the Montana forest on an April night, and that was a simple and entirely sufficient reason. She ran. North first through the pines and over the ridge, and down into the valley, and along the creek bank. The creek she had heard from 300 yards away on the morning walk back to her truck 8 months ago. The sound that had been the first clear signal that something had fundamentally changed. She ran across it at the shallow section, and up through the meadow on the far side, and east along the ridge, and back through the forest from the south, a full circuit of the area that had been the beginning of everything, running it now in the opposite direction from everything she had been when she first ran it. The April night was vivid around her. The forest was waking from winter, the specific rich smell of earth thawing, of green things starting their process again, of water moving in new directions as the snowmelt began. She ran through it and felt the world as it was, layered and alive, and enormous in every direction. And she ran, not because anything was chasing her, and not toward anything specific. She ran because she wanted to. In a forest she knew. In a body she had learned to inhabit fully. In a life that was hers in every part. She came back to the clearing from the south, which was not the direction she had left from, which meant she had made a wider circuit than she intended. The moon was past its apex now, starting its long descent toward the western ridge, but the light was still clean and full across the grass. Kalian was at the north edge of the tree line, standing still in the shadow, watching her come in, not tense, not waiting with the quality of someone who has been waiting a long time, simply present, the way he was present in any space he occupied, fully, without apology, without performing the fullness of it. She stopped in the center of the clearing. They looked at each other across the moonlit grass. She thought, I woke up on this ground 8 months ago, and did not know my own name for a second. I thought something was wrong with me, and it turned out nothing was wrong with me. I just hadn't found the right shape yet. She thought the right shape was here all along. The mate bond was quiet in her chest, not the urgent pull that had ached through 200 miles of southbound highway, not the insistent pointing of those early weeks when she had not yet understood what it was. Something older now, something that had the quality of a thing that has been tested against real difficulty and has not changed. A river after a flood, the same river, more settled, having demonstrated what it was made of. She shifted back to herself in the moonlight, and stood in the clearing on 2 feet, and felt the April cold on her skin, and the wet grass under her feet, and the particular clarity that always came after a run. The world fully present, everything in its proper place, nothing competing for her attention, except the moment she was actually standing in. He shifted back too. He walked across the clearing toward her, unhurried, and she watched him come, and thought, this is the person who was in that chair in the dark. This is the person underneath the title. This is the person I chose. He stopped a foot from her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him in the cold air. He put his hand against her face, the way she had put her hand against his, careful and specific, as though she were something he was still learning the shape of. Silver Wolf, he said, quietly. Don't, she said. He smiled. The smile that opened the room. Not a prophecy, he said, just you. Better, she said. The clearing was quiet around them, and the moon was going west, and the forest was dark in every direction, enormous and alive, and full of all the information her senses could reach if she let them. And underneath all of that, the simple, specific warmth of the person standing in front of her. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. They stood in the clearing where it had all started, in the particular way of 2 people who have come through something difficult and are on the other side of it and know it, and the night moved around them like something that had been waiting for exactly this. When she came back to the clearing, Kalian was there, shifted, standing still in the shadow of the tree line on the north side, watching her come in from the south. She stopped in the center of the clearing. They looked at each other across the moonlit grass. The mate bond was a quiet and steady thing in her chest, not the urgent, searching pull of its early days, but something older and more settled, the particular quality of something that has been tested against real conditions and has held completely. The moon was overhead. The forest was quiet. She stood in the clearing and thought, I was 24 years old, and I woke up on a forest floor and did not know what I was. I drove north. I did not flinch from a single thing I found there. That was the right thing to do. The Silver Wolf ran one last circuit of the clearing, for the satisfaction of it, for the pure pleasure of being this particular thing, in this particular place, under the full Montana moon, with the whole night available, and the whole forest open, and the whole of her life, arranged around the simple and complete fact of being exactly who she was. Not running from anything, not running toward anything that was not already hers, just alive, and moving, and free. She stood in the clearing for a long time before she shifted back. There was no rush. The moon was still up. The forest was still available. Kalian's wolf was at the tree line, still and patient, waiting the way he waited everything, without impatience, without performance, with the quality of genuine ease that she had come to recognize as one of the truest things about him. She thought about the night she had arrived in this clearing for the first time, without knowing what was coming, without knowing what she was. She had been frightened and she had been alone, and she had moved toward the thing she was afraid of, with the careful, methodical attention she brought to everything she did not yet understand. That had been right. That was who she was, before the bite, and after the bite, and standing in the moonlight now, the person who moved toward what was unknown, rather than away from it. She shifted back. The cold air of the April night settled around her. She stood in the clearing and looked at Kalian across the moonlit grass, and felt the whole of where they were, and how they had gotten here, and thought that it was, when you held all of it together, the most unexpected and specific and completely correct arrangement of things she had ever been part of. She crossed the clearing. He met her in the middle of it, which was where they had both been heading. They stood in the center of the clearing in the April moonlight, and the forest was large and quiet in every direction, and the night was nearly over. And she thought about everything that had happened in this particular patch of grass. The first shift, the first dawn, the first words spoken between them, and thought that it was the right place to be standing at the end of a night like this one. The beginning and the middle, and what she hoped was the beginning of a different kind of middle, all at once. She said, "I am going to call Clara this week." He said, "I know." She looked at him. "You know? You have been ready for it for about 3 weeks," he said. "I have been waiting for you to notice." She looked at him for a moment longer. "You are observant," she said. "It is one of my better qualities," he said, and the tone was so dry and so almost humor that she laughed, and he smiled in the way he smiled, when something pleased him, and he was not managing the pleasure of it, and the clearing held both sounds for a moment, before the forest took them. She put her arm around his waist, and he put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood together in the Montana clearing, in the last of the April moonlight. And the silver wolf was quiet inside her, present and settled and at home, and the whole of her life was here, and it was hers completely. The wolf remembered the forest before the wolf knew what it was. The woman remembered the morning she woke with dirt under her nails, and a scar that should not have existed, and a world that was suddenly larger than it had been the day before. Between those 2 mornings was a life she had built out of difficult things and true things, and it was hers, and it was enough, and it was, in every way that actually mattered, exactly what she had been looking for when she drove north at 4 in the morning, without quite knowing what she was driving toward. She had found it. She kept it.